Hi, it's Mark from Top Local. We're here with Bernie Pawlik, Pawlik Automotive in Vancouver, repairing and maintaining cars in Vancouver for 38 years and 18-time winners so far of Best Auto Repair in Vancouver. How you doing, Bernie?
Doing very well.
So we're going to talk about a Ford Ranger 2007 that had a clutch problem. What was going on with this vehicle?
So the vehicle came to our shop for a regular annual maintenance, but when it arrived at our door, the clutch pedal just went to the floor and we couldn't put it into gear. It was just all floppy. And so we proceeded to do a diagnosis on that because that was obviously the most critical thing to fix on the vehicle. What we found is a clutch slave cylinder it basically failed and caused the lack of pressure to release the clutch.
So how did you determine that the slave cylinder had failed?
Well, a lot of it's a process of elimination. The tricky thing with clutches is you can't see a lot of it. The actual clutch itself is in between the engine and the transmission and the bell housing area. On this particular vehicle, there are actually some access holes where you can look inside. And we could actually, on this one, we could actually see it. The clutch slave cylinder is internal. It's located inside, not inside the transmission, but inside the bell housing. And we could actually see fluid leaking out of it. So the issue was either the slave cylinder, which was most likely, because once you have a fluid leak, that's a problem. But it could also been a failure of the master cylinder. But we figured that the best strategy for repair would be to replace the slave cylinder and the clutch itself, because we have to take everything apart, and then determine whether the master cylinder was bad after that.
So what's involved in that kind of repair?
Well, so what's involved? The transmission has to be removed. And from there, we can examine the rest of the clutch, which we did and ended up replacing because it was nearly worn out anyways. We replaced the slave cylinder, replaced the clutch, have the flywheel ground, and put it all back together, bleed the system, flush the fluid, and tested it out, and it worked fine. So the slave cylinder was good in this case. I'll just share a couple of photos. Nice little black Ford Ranger here.
Yep.
And, this is a pretty basic truck. It's actually a four-cylinder engine truck, which is kind of rare. Very minimal options. Really not very common to find a truck like this. It's all plain Jane truck with very few options, but it's a good little work truck. Simple, standard transmission. Seems like nowadays everything you buy is fully loaded with the biggest engine and all the power windows, but some people like these simple things, and they're actually pretty good. They're kind of fun to work on too. Clutch slave cylinder. So this is a unique design on this, not just unique to a Ranger, but to a number of mostly North American vehicles and a lot of trucks. It's a built-in slave cylinder and a clutch release bearing. And it sits on the collar of the transmission where the release bearing normally slides. So it's rather brilliant because it's eliminated the clutch release fork, the pivot point. It's eliminated a number of parts by amalgamating them together. There's a big bellows piece here with the arrow points to, and that's actually where you can see some fluid leaking out. So the slave cylinder sort of is inside this piece here. That bellows is just a dust shield. And once fluid leaks out, of course, that indicates it's actually got a pretty bad leak. If we were to cut this open, it'd probably be just loaded full of fluid. This is the release bearing here. So this spins with the clutch, and when you press the pedal down, this gets forced forward against the clutch and releases it. Right now, it actually sits naturally in a forward position. There's a spring inside that actually keeps it under a little bit of pressure. And so these other items here, this is the bleeder screw where you bleed the air out of this hydraulic system. And this is where the actual clutch line, the clutch hose from the vehicle attaches.
So are all clutches hydraulic?
Nowadays they are. I mean, there used to be a day when there was hydraulic was kind of a novelty. Actually, it goes back a long ways. But, clutches used to be one of three ways. You'd have a cable to release the clutch, which was very common, or they actually even had linkage rods that a lot of vehicles had linkage rods and bell cranks that would connect up from the clutch pedal down to the transmission. Actually, I remember having an old Fargo van, which is like a Dodge van, because nobody probably knows what a Fargo van is. But I remember being in an intersection and I pushed the clutch pedal down and the linkage broke. I guess the rods had worn so much from moving, it just busted apart and left a couple parts lying on the ground in the intersection. But long gone are the days of those type of clutches. They're hydraulic. I mean, they just work so much better. Nice smooth engagement, and the pedals are just the feel is so much better. less moving parts. Yeah, just overall way better.
And what's the advantage of using a hydraulic system?
Well, the advantage is, I think, really smooth engagement and just pedal feel. It's also, there's a lot more power in hydraulics than there is in linkages. So you can operate a clutch more powerfully and easily. And I think, as I said, pedal feel is a real big thing. You know, you get a lot of modern vehicles and the clutch, it's really nice to engage and disengage. So it's, you know, whereas in the olden days, a lot of clutches were really hard to push. Cables tend to, you know, they bind up over time. Whereas hydraulics, there's very few actually moving contact points. It's just the fluid pieces that move and they're already lubricated.
Yeah, I remember driving a Porsche 914 that was, I knew I was going to add like 3 or 4 inches on my left leg just to make the clutch work.
Yeah, exactly. That's the case. And the failure rate on cable clutches and those linkage rods is a lot higher than it is on hydraulics. I mean, hydraulic clutches still go bad, as in the case of this vehicle. But, you know, the linkage, you know, cables, I used to work on a lot of Volkswagens, like way back, air-cooled Volkswagen. Clutch cable breaking was just a really common problem. Which
hydraulics are a little more reliable in that regard, I guess.
Hydraulics, yeah. We still do a lot of repairs on them, but you know, they're not like cables, not like the cable days. And the nice thing is when they work and you set it up, they just work. There's no problem. They either work or they don't. Whereas cables start stretching and, you know, and they get hard to push, and there's just, yeah. There's no good old days with cable clutches.
Well, even hydraulic clutches probably are on the sunset path at this point.
Well, yeah, and you don't see too many, you know, vehicles. There's less and less vehicles offered with standard transmissions. But interestingly enough, a lot of, hydraulics are still used, but they're automatic. There's a lot of transmissions that use automatically engaged clutches, and they have hydraulic systems, but they're all kind of built in. So, you know, which actually makes them even more expensive to repair when they break. But you have these like semi-automatic transmissions where, you know, you take your foot off the brake, you press the gas, and the clutch, it actually has a clutch and engages automatically. So it just doesn't have a master cylinder and all the other plumbing that gets associated.
And how are these Ford Rangers for reliability?
They're pretty good. You know, they're good. It's a nice little truck. As I said, it's pretty simple. So that, you know, there's really not too much that goes wrong with it out of the ordinary that you expect on a pickup truck. And it's small and, you know, small engine, pretty good for gas, but yeah, really not a lot goes wrong with it. This vehicle is around 100,000 kilometers and this clutch is worn out for the first time. So, you know, it's just a little over 10 years. That's pretty good, you know, pretty good lifespan. If it had been driven more and on the highway, the clutch probably would have got more mileage, you know, but it's a pretty good life for that. And, you know, brakes wear is sort of normal. You know, one thing about the Ranger, it's a small truck, so you don't really want to overload it. You know, if you're going to be, you know, sticking a ton of gravel in the back all the time, you're going to wreck the truck pretty fast. But if you just put light, moderate loads in the truck, it'll last a long time without a lot of problems.
So there you go. If you have a Ranger in Vancouver and you need repairs, the guys to see are Pawlik Automotive. You can reach them at 604-327-7112 to book your appointment, or check out their website, pawlikautomotive.com. Thanks, Bernie.
Thanks, Mark.